Colin, I'm going to hand over to you first of all and drop you into the spotlight. So recording has started.
Yeah, thanks, Paddy, for that. Like Paddy said, what we wanted to do is just talk about obviously the topic, which is building an intranet within Teams. This was a bit of a experimental topic in that we do a lot of work with clients in the UK around Teams, and we do a lot of work looking at SharePoints, and we do a lot of work looking at intranets. And very much what we tend to do is use SharePoint as a platform for building an intranet, and then we can bring a SharePoint intranet into Teams so that they are sort of combined. But there's also a lot of stuff that you can do actually with Microsoft Teams itself in terms of doing some of the stuff that you might want to do when you build an intranet. And so we were just curious really as to how much you can use Microsoft Teams itself for doing intranety stuff, and actually create the whole thing all in one go. And so we said, well, let's chuck a webinar subjects out there and let's have a go and sort of see how far we get really. So that's what we're going to do. So we spent literally, a couple of hours having a play, seeing what we can build. So we'll take you through some of that. But what we thought we'd do, just to set the scene a bit, is just have a chat about what actually is needed in an intro. So Florian and Janine, if you wanted to chip in, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine. But yeah, the first question really to the group is, when you think about a corporate intranet or a company intranet, what type of features do you think should be in that or would commonly be in that?
I mean, I'll throw in straight away. News is going to be the big one, isn't it? On there, it's it's getting those comms out, getting that company news out to people is the kind of given for intranets generally.
It's certainly a communication channel. And that's one of the big things when I go in with our clients that they're looking for. It's a new communication channel in the business. Yet we've all got email. We all have email overload, but there's so much more you can do with an intranet to actually push out those communications to people.
What sorts of communications are you thinking?
So for me, I'm talking, of course, news, as Paddy mentioned, but there can be anything from just small snippets and announcements, your new starters, but also signposting off to other tools and services that people need to utilize. So it becomes a bit of a portal moving forward. I think signposting is quite a good term on that. So policies and procedures, booking a holiday, raising your expenses, communicating how that's done, but also giving you the services to do those tasks as well. Again, without it being filled in paperwork, emails, etc., that we see in some companies.
And I guess all that reference stuff as well, isn't it? Is I mean, you said about policies and procedures, but finding the staff handbook, finding the holiday procedure, trying to find out phone numbers for people and all of that stuff. If you can have that all sat in one place within an intranet, it's all about kind of commsing that stuff out. But it's got to be engaging as well, because if it's not engaging, then people just don't use it.
What we find a lot of the time is that with the information that's shown there, you need to tackle multiple different audiences. So you're not going to guarantee that the piece of news that you show on the page is going to attract everyone there. But if someone goes there for the purpose of booking a holiday and they read that news, then you're capturing a few extra people that may not have been going there for that purpose in the first place. So it really is a combined communication tool, tackling different people at different times of days, different cultures in organizations. So you really need to know your business to know what's going to bring those people in.
So you put those kind of important things that people have to do. So people have to book holiday, they have to read certain policies and procedures, but you then enhance that by putting the things like social stuff and the kind of things are a little bit lighter as well, just to make it a little bit more engaging.
What type of social stuff would you be thinking? I mean, would it be literally purely we've done one pictures of your dog, or is there a more serious social interaction side that you would want to develop within your business?
I guess it depends on the business, and some businesses are kind of encourage a lighter feeling of these things. Some businesses are a little bit more focused and less frilly, I guess. But it can be all of those things. You know, it can be just kind of commonplace chats. The beauty of Teams is you've got those sort of chat channels that you can use. So it can be light-hearted chats and the photo of your dog and look what I did at the weekend, or it could be, you know, kind of social events. You know, you might have an event section, you might have a channel that's just around that.
I think building communities is something we see quite frequently as well. And there's communities in regards to knowledge in the workplace. So we've worked with clients before that have been heavily involved in the health industry, and lots of people in the business are really interested in things about the brain. So, you know, they might not be working on that day to day, but they get together, they discuss that stuff because that's part of their kind of scientific background. But also you've got a lot of people like Paddy sitting here who's interested in his art and his surfing. You know, let's build a community around that. If you've got no one in Paddy's team that actually does that, you know, who's to say there's someone sat in finance who surfs every weekend and has no one else to sort of talk to about that and doesn't realize there's someone sat there that has those same kind of likes and interests. So you start to build that community, and that sharing of knowledge and
experience,
content
I guess.
and experience, across you know, cross departmental as well. You know, you're there to do a job, but you're also there to form relationships and bonds with people.
Because I guess, you know, Teams was built primarily as a collaboration tool, wasn't it? You know, originally that was the goal of it, but it's become so much more than that, as they've, you know, as the functionalities become richer and richer over the last couple of years. So, you know, there's so much more you can do now with that. So, you know, it's not just about two of you working on a document, which it's really good for. You know, it's also all these other areas that you can look at.
Steve's gone.
I must have offended Steve already. Wow. Normally takes me much longer than that to offend him.
You come back and muted.
Yeah.
Okay, so loads of stuff that typically companies would want for an intranet. There's loads of good stuff in there. What would be the advantage of trying to get this done in Teams? I mean, you know, we talk about communities, so you've got Yammer, and you know, I mean, companies are using WhatsApp and all sorts of other things for communities. You talk about news, and obviously SharePoint is a great platform for news. And companies have got the website and they've got the Twitter feeds and all of that sort of stuff. And then, you know, people have got very well established shared folders on their file servers for all your policies and procedures and all that. You know, what's the driver for using Teams for this stuff? Because, you know, at the end of the day, a lot of companies are using Teams for holding meetings like this and, you know, managing calendars, and that's as far as they're going.
I think if you threw the clock back 2 years, I mean, we were using Teams 2 years ago. Not a huge amount of people we work with were using Teams in earnest a couple of years ago. Obviously, the events of the last 18 months have changed that landscape dramatically. So people are spending much more time on Teams. So the more rich you can make the one place of working, and without people having to dive off in other directions, then it just becomes easier for people. You know, it's easy for people to find stuff because it's right there at their fingertips. They're already in Teams.
It's that familiarity, isn't it?
Yeah.
That you've already got within the business. And some people might be looking at their Teams application as, oh, that's that tool that we make video calls on. But even that is a slight win, because when you tell them that your intranet or your communications are on that as well, and there's more to it, it doesn't feel like a frightening new system that they have to get into. You're already using it. You've got it on your machine already. We're just evolving that slightly to give you even more information in that one place that you already go to day to day. So,
I mean, Steve, how many times do you get asked by clients, so we're building this big fancy new intranet on whatever system, how do we engage people? How do we get people to go there?
yeah, exactly right.
They're already here. You know,
Yeah.
people are already on Teams, your staff are already using it. So why not kind of leverage it to the max?
Isn't there a risk that you end up putting too much stuff into Teams and therefore things get lost or missed, or it just gets confused as to what this thing's actually for?
You probably need some governance around it, and you know, you don't want it just to be a free for all, I guess. And you know, we know we've got kind of stuff around governance and managing that. You need a little bit of education, but then, you know, you probably need some education whatever system you're using, don't you?
And you need structure, and that's what the governance is going to give you. You know, it's going to define that structure, but it's also going to control and monitor that structure moving forward. Team sprawl is a thing, and it's a thing we see frequently. You know, and this is an issue when you just let people, as Paddy said, take a free for all, and, you know, look, there's this great tool, just get on and use it. You know, you need to kind of structure that specifically for the communications piece, know what's going into there, know how it's being communicated. Most clients we're working with have their internal communications team or their marketing team that kind of have that ownership over it as a product or as a system in the business. And you just need to control it accordingly, the same as you would with your Salesforce or your CRM. Make sure it's managed appropriately.
If you're using Teams as an intranet, if part of your Teams, and I'm not saying all of it, but if part of your Teams is effectively your intranet, and you've got a Teams team, an intranet team, and then you've got kind of various channels within that intranet team, if people pin that, then that's there always at the top of their teams. So it's really easy to not lose it. And that's not even an education piece. That's just right hand click on it and pin it. Send that message out to people. It's always there at the top. They don't, they're not struggling to find stuff.
I mean, that's a really interesting point actually from an intranet perspective, because personalization is something that people ask about frequently. How do you make an intranet that you turn up to actually say, morning, Steve, here's the work you've got to do today. Here's everything prepped and ready for you. That's going to be the most efficient intranet for me. Actually having the ability to set up and pin teams and pin the channels that I'm interested in, follow the relevant topics I'm interested in. Actually, that becomes that personalized experience. Me and Paddy can rock up to the same intranet, but both get a different approach that serves our daily working practices. And that's really critical.
Okay. So a big part of AMT's business is building intranets on SharePoint Online. Okay. Tricky little topic, so awkward. Why would people build an intranet on SharePoint Online, or what would be the downside of doing this in Teams? So we've heard of some of the advantages, or can you have the best of both worlds?
I think best of both worlds. It's scope and scale of an intranet. If you're working in a small 5-10 person organization, you could still use SharePoint. There's nothing wrong with that, and there's certainly gaps that's going to bridge for you. But do you want to go to that level, that expense, that extra system, if you can get and push Teams as far as it can possibly go? And that's one of the key things, really. You either start with 2 systems and you start working on both of them ever so slightly, or do you work with Teams and push it to its limit and then work out where there's that point where SharePoint sits above it? With a lot of organizations.
It's easier with Teams as well, isn't it? It's much easier to structure things for Teams. SharePoint has got so much better with SharePoint Modern. That interface and the content management is so much slicker and so much easier, but it's still not as easy as Teams. So you can do that without having to have a raft of experts on board to guide you through it. Just a few pointers and you can get there with it. Whereas SharePoint, to do something good, you need that expertise.
Microsoft provides you the ability to generate apps within Teams that are essentially SharePoint sites embedded within your Teams platform, either within a team or within the app bar itself. So, and by default, the documents general storage area in Teams is linked to SharePoint anyway. So there is a link. And when I talk to people about Teams and SharePoint, I do say that you're not essentially having one without the other. It's just how much of the background SharePoint do you want to expose straight away, and that might be something you don't want to expose until the need arises, which could be the fact of a larger company, larger scale. We need to introduce a holiday booking process and forms and lots of things like that. That may well be when you're stepping into the SharePoint environment, you're going away from the communication piece and you're building it as a more business oriented.
Or if you've got a bigger company, if you're a larger company and you've got a communications department, then it kind of stands to reason that you're probably going to want something a bit bigger with more bells and whistles, because you've got a team to manage that. You've probably got the budget to put into that to make something really very slick. So I think that's always going to be a big factor. I think Steve, you said about it at the beginning that if you're sort of 5 to 10 seats, then SharePoint's ideal. If you're 500 seats, then it probably isn't ideal, because you're going to have so many more channels that it's in that kind of jungle. So
don't forget culture. What is a business already used to? We work with businesses that are moving from an existing intranet platform onto Microsoft 365, and they know as a business that they actually need that intranet to this size and scale. Some companies these tools are completely brand new and they've never had an intranet before, so they're coming at it with a blank sheet of paper. We've heard of this thing called an intranet. We think we need one. It's going to benefit our company, but actually, what does that need to be? And that's the point where you go into your design phases of, is Teams enough? Does it require the scale of SharePoint?
I think also,
you guys, are there any points on there that you're thinking, but can it do this or can it do that? In, you know, what would your kind of key intranet requirements? Or do you think we're kind of on the right track of the sort of stuff you guys will be looking at?
I think on the right track.
That's always encouraging to hear. Thank you.
well, it's still here. So I think one of the other things is control as well. So with SharePoint, you know, with Teams you can do intranet-y stuff, but it's not designed to build an intranet, whereas SharePoint is, and so you get much more, you know, for a bigger organization, you do get much more control, and you can, you know, sort of implement your governance rules a lot better. Let's dive into what we managed to put together this morning, if I can. So I'll just jump in there, and I'm going to get Steve mainly to show you around, if I can do this. Okay, so we're in our, let me just sort my desktops out. Yeah, this is AMT's own internal Teams environment, and what we've done is, yeah, just built a demo out this morning. It's all based on some of the stuff that we had. So we haven't built this whole lot this morning, but yeah, we've sort of added a few more bits and pieces and just put it together into what might look like a company intranet. So we built a few channels out. We've got just a general information. So this, I guess, would be your intranet homepage. And then we've got another channel here, which is AMT information, so specific information about the company. And then really a few social channels. So we've got company improvements. So, you know, just tell us what, you know, inviting the all of our team to come in and suggest things that we can do better. And that's a really good way of interacting with the management of an organization, and a couple of social channels. So everyone likes a picture of a dog, and yeah, a social channel. So very quickly, just by simply creating a team within Microsoft Teams and adding a few channels, you're automatically getting something that's starting to do some of what we're talking about. So creating communities, getting people interacting together, and starting to share some information. And here's a very simple newsfeed. So we've got this will be your intranet team. We've got your general channel, which is where you'd immediately go into. And we just started publishing some news articles. So really quick, easy, cheap, quick way of being able to generate company news. Steve, do you want to show us some more of the sort of newsy type features in here?
Yeah, definitely. Rather than request control on your screen, just because your screen's being a bit slow coming through on my side, I'm afraid.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
If I just share my screen, it might be a bit safer. So just bear me a second, I'll bring that up. Just give me the nod or the thumbs up if that's
yeah, that's
showing okay for you. Yeah, perfect. So yeah, we're inside the same team here. So I mean, one of the key areas to start talking about is news, as Colin was mentioning. So if we just come back into the general channel here, as Cole mentioned, you know, we've got some news posts which are in place here. These are actually announcements in terms of conversations. So if we were to go into place and actually create a conversation here, what you get to begin with is just a small area just to type any form of short, quick message in, which is more of a communication piece. But if we were to click on this format button down here, the little A with the pen, and we open that into place, we actually have, you know, a bit more information that we can work with in terms of styling. In terms of our conversation that we have by default, I can actually switch that to an announcement. And this is where I get to play around a little bit here and produce something like the Friendly Friday banner that we've got in place here. We can also have that in place and look to post that across different channels. And then we can change the way that we actually style our text in place here. So if I was to create some text we can simply go and style this in terms of bold, headings, quotes, etc., things that you're probably used to within like the Word environment. So you can create within a conversation piece something which is a bit more stylized as maybe a potential kind of newsletter. You can embed images, links, etc. So I won't dive into too much detail on there, but there is the ability to put out what is an announcement versus a conversation. Paddy?
On a kind of slightly unrelated thing, it looks so much better with the dark background than the white background. But that's just my thing.
Yeah, and just on that point, that is all that's all changeable within your settings. Actually, up here under the ellipsis menu. So if you go into your settings environment, you can switch between your default white, dark backgrounds, etc. So yeah, a lot of us developers and consultants seem to have it on the dark background. People are staring at it for so much of the day. So it always looks quite nice.
And you can obviously comment on all of this stuff, can't you? Once you've got a news story in there, the very nature of things is you can stick a reply in and put a comment on a news story.
For sure. So it keeps everything in place in terms of the article. So into here, I can actually reply on this one here and go, that's great. I could put that in place, but also I can mention Nicole, for example, by doing the @ symbol, and I can go at Nicole. Have you seen this? If I can type, there we go. So that would actually notify Nicole, and she would then see that news article. So there's also ways of allowing other people in your business to start sharing news with one another and pinpoint items. So that's quite a good way to communicate around news articles.
Can you restrict who can actually create a news article in the channel?
Not in terms of the channel here. So you're providing people the edit access into the team. So to be able to access teams, you are granting people those edit rights. We've had clients who have spoke to us and sort of said, can we have a team where we only control the announcements that go out? But that's not possible for you to engage in that team. The idea is that kind of engaged communication and chat versus it just being an announcement window. If you do want to go through something which is actually more controlled, that's where you could bring SharePoint into place. And I think we have an example just up here. So if I just go to one of these tabs, so along the top here, we'll see some different tabs in place. These are all created from clicking on the plus button here from within a channel.
And they all sit within that channel, don't they? So they're tabs within a channel.
Yeah, that's right. So if I were to go SharePoint or SharePoint pages, I could embed something in place. So here's what we've done earlier. If we bring up the news. So this is bringing up now our company news, which is actually stored on SharePoint. So this is where you can have more control, because in this scenario, it could well be that I have access to read this page within SharePoint. Colin and Paddy are the people who actually create these news articles. I can still see them in the Teams environment, but they're hosted on SharePoint. Again, it's back to that control, which was something, Colin, you mentioned earlier. We can see that.
And do we need to do anything clever to get news working in SharePoint?
No, not massively. If I just bring this into place, so I've just got to open it up. This is a news digest page, but to simply go and create a news page, let me just head actually into our homepage of the intranet. It's a simple modification of editing the relevant SharePoint page. We can see our company news feed in place here, but if I just hit the plus icon and I search for news, I can simply go in and just create a news feed into place.
Okay. So this is where we're getting the best of both worlds, that we've got
exactly right.
Relatively out of the box SharePoint features that we're then bringing back into Microsoft Teams.
And all of these pages are hosted in SharePoint. So again, the creation of the page is nice and simple from the news web part. And all of this, if you have used SharePoint before, this is very simple in the sense that once again, we edit the page and everything's just at your fingertips here. So we've got the relevant textual web parts, which we can make changes to as we see fit. We can go in, we can add tables, imagery, embed videos. You can do all sorts of kind of make that news more interactive and more engaging. So that's probably something that SharePoint gives you extra as well, is that kind of level of engagement. Teams is very much more, as the message is, the announcement piece. You can do a little bit, but you can't maybe put everything into place in there.
Cool. So we've covered a bit of news. So this is sort of ongoing news items, things that are happening in the company, new customers, new starters, things like that. How about sort of more static information that you might want to show? So maybe handbook type things, sort of sickness policies and just sort of news, but the information that people need to know to do the job within the organization.
Yeah, so for those, we cover those in kind of two different items. We talk about either documentation, which could be your PDF, Word documents, or we talk about our wiki pages and our pages information. So if I just showcase both of those at the moment, I believe I'll go to the general and files area. If we just load that up. So in place here, we could just see a simple document library that's in place within Teams with all the relevant documents uploaded into place.
So Steve, have we still got the same thing with edit? You're talking about the news, that anyone, if you're just kind of putting news in as announcements, if you're part of that team, you can edit stuff. Is it the same with the document library in this?
Exactly the same. Yeah, so that's an item that you need to be cautious of in terms of using the general files area that you get by default from Teams, because that's going to inherit the permissions that you are setting for that team. You can make some changes in the background of SharePoint, which obviously reflect what's here. So for example, on this document library, we've actually got check-in and check-out switched on for the library. That would affect every single channel that's utilizing this library though. So if I was to open this document up, and once that loads up, you can see that I'm just in a reading view at the moment. I can't edit unless I specifically go up and request to edit the document.
Yeah.
But this is now going to bring up and say that I need to check that document out.
So there's some level of governance that you can get in there. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a minimal level of restriction in there. However, what I would look at doing, if I bring that back, is I would extend this a little bit further in the sense of actually, again, that best of both worlds, going into SharePoint and building a separate document library for the purposes of policies and procedures, which we've done so here. So if I bring this one up.
So how's that pulling through? That's just embedded as an application again, Steve, is it?
So this is simply going through the plus icon up here. You have the ability to add an extra tab, and you can go and add a document library, and that will ask for the specific URL of the library you've built. Cool. The reason that's a good approach is that this library can then actually be completely configured, how you want it to display. In actual fact, this library isn't looking too great with the dark background in comparison to the white background with our colouring.
Yeah, I didn't want to say that, Steve.
So there's something to to look out for. But you can see that we've got conditional formatting in place here. We've also got, the ability to tag different bits of data and what we call metadata. So there's a few extra functions and features that are there that you can actually define for this specific library.
Can you still filter in the same way as you would be able to if it was in SharePoint?
Absolutely, yep. So you've got all your filters, your A to Z, your filter by, everything just runs as if you were working within a SharePoint page. Yeah. So I can see all documents that are for Colin. Hopefully that will load up for me. There you go. Still looks like quite a few because I think Colin's managing all of these in here, but you still have those options in place. Yeah. One example we had was a client that used Teams to build out a finance intranet, mini intranet, but one key thing they wanted was contracts, and those contracts did have a lot of restrictions on who could manage them and what tags were in place. So we did exactly this process for them. The other part that Colin was mentioning was about kind of staff handbook. So if I go down to back into our demo for AMT information channel. So in here, we've got, I believe it's under the about AMT, if that comes up. There we go. And then hopefully
go into the one in the general channel, actually.
You got it in the general one, yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's it. There we go. So here we're using a wiki, which is obviously powered by OneNote. And this just allows you to have multiple sections and pages. So we can see, for example, here we're building out what could be similar to a SharePoint page, a bit of information about a particular office, who's in that office, where's it located, etc. And that can be extended into things such as your company handbook. So things that are a little bit more text heavy, such as joining AMT and reading through the handbook pages actually on the go within the Teams environment, as opposed to downloading a sort of 500-page document elsewhere. So again, that's more static information that you can show. Again, it could be a SharePoint page, but it is possible to be able to create that stuff within Teams.
So I mean, again, this is a wiki, so by design anybody could edit this. So this might be better for a department or a smaller organization.
It has its pros and cons. If you're creating a knowledge base, I see having an entire team being able to go and add and remove and put things in place. It's actually really good to build up that knowledge for something which is maybe a specific HR policy. It would be a bit awkward if someone's going in there and sort of suddenly adding that they have 50 days of holiday and not 25 days of holiday. HR probably won't want that. So again, it's that risk reward viewpoint that you need to look at, and how open you make things.
Absolutely. We also talked about, so we talked about when we were coming up with ideas of what we wanted in an Intranet staff handbook, so we've covered that. How about signposting? So producing some sort of portal, how would we go about doing that?
Yeah, so one thing you've got is the tabs at the top in place here. So actually those tabs go and link you off to different environments. So for example, we've actually got our AMT website embedded into here. That actually links out quite well with news as well. Just to bring it back to the news side of things, is you could link to other external news interfaces. So you've got that in place.
So I guess if you had a really, if you're kind of really website focused, external website focused company, then you'd almost do the publish, write once, publish many times from that web page.
Yeah, that's one of the key parts of that is keeping something dynamic without giving someone an extra job to do. Essentially, it's just there by default, which normally the marketing team are quite grateful for. So we have that in place. But what we've also got with in our Teams environment is the ability again to embed SharePoint pages. Again, we can embed them as tabs, but also embed them as apps. So just one item we've actually got on the left-hand side here is this AMT Launchpad. And if I open this up into place, this is using one of our own AMT custom modules on a SharePoint page, but we can see utilizing our tiles module here. We've got a Launchpad directly in Teams, signposting you off to different areas. So if, for example, I want to go into, let's just head to the lookbook, see where this one takes me to. That's just jump straight in, and this is actually taking me to an external website opened up in a new tab.
And do you know that would be quite a funky way to present a home screen for your Teams intranet? You could actually have that as effectively the home screen, and then link that through into the various different channels.
And the scale down onto mobile as well.
Big impact.
So you've got the mobile application. So having a page like this, which is a bit more cut down, that you can imagine someone using on this or their tablet or mobile device. Not too much content on there, just the quick kind of bookmarks to get to the systems. It's a lot easier for the end user. But you do have the ability to also embed a full kind of intranet page if you wish, like so, which again has a set of tiles, a set of links. So this is where we've got, more of an intranet page, still best of both worlds, built into place. So this is all signposting you out from Teams into SharePoint as you need to, and things will remain in Teams as long as they can do. So I believe if I just go into directory,
and that's kind of getting more into that kind of crossover, isn't it? There, it's that crossover between having a SharePoint intranet and surfacing it into Teams. I guess you could kind of there's degrees at how far you could go. You might want to have a full-blown intranet and be able to put some of it on Teams. You might just want to have a couple of pages that are really useful to get the things you want. So that policies and procedures library or kind of funky homepage, that might be all that you've got actually kind of built specifically in Teams, but you're surfacing it in SharePoint, but you're surfacing it through Teams.
Excellent.
Yeah, for sure.
That's looking really good actually. One of the other things that came up when we were saying what do we want from an intranet was we talked about developing communities and sharing knowledge and experience. Now, I know we're also talking about team sprawl, and using Teams for creating communities is great. But for a larger organization, I imagine before you know it, you're going to have 500 different teams and communities and channels.
We had a client going back about a year and a half, Cole, who I think they'd opened Teams up for about a month, and they had 2 users that had set up 134 teams between them in 2 weeks. Basically, every time they spoke to someone, they set up a team, and they'd lost. They were a month into using Teams, they'd already lost control of it.
Yeah. So yeah, great. But I mean, what would you say in terms of the balance between letting people do that and then keeping control. How would you advise customers to manage that?
You've got to, if you, I guess, like with any system, if you're going down the road of this, then you need to be having a sort of governance and some policies around that before you start. I mean, well enough. The way we do things is that I can't just go and set up a team, not just me, everyone in the team, just to be clear to anyone else.
Well,
it's not
probably
just
particularly you, Paddy, but
don't let Paddy set up a team, for God's sake. But we can't set up a team. We have to request a team and say why we want it, what we want it for, what the expiry date is on it. And then if that's approved and there isn't already a team existing for that, then the team gets set up. So it becomes very much easier to manage that. We've got a lot of protocols around naming and all of those things as well. So you need that governance. I guess the smaller the company is, the easier it is to manage it. If you've got a 5,000 seat company, then you probably need to pay more attention to that governance up front.
The other side of things is also looking at the different tools that are available. So again, we're talking Teams today, but people on the call may be aware of Yammer as well. Yammer actually use the term communities. So it's looking at those different tools, and that's part of the governance as well in terms of what tool serves what purpose and what job. But again, Yammer does integrate into all of this as well. So again, to take it from a Yammer perspective, and again also news, is if I was to look through this ellipsis menu here and go down to my connectors area for this specific channel, I can actually look at some different connectors that are in place. They're all categorized, but if I go for news and social, we've actually got a Yammer connector in place, so I can actually embed those kind of Yammer updates into Teams. So again, kind of share those two working platforms. Again, we have SharePoint News and we have RSS from other environments. So don't limit yourself on, I've got one particular tool. I need this tool just to work the way I want it to work. Look at what tool each tool's strength is and look at how they complement one another, and then how those complementing factors can actually be joined together, because you can still have Yammer and SharePoint and custom external websites all in the background running, but your main interface is Teams, and we call that a Teams first approach. That's where the users are landing, and that's the environment that they're staying in for 80-90% of the time, unless pushed outside of it. But from an IT perspective, there's still a lot more in place.
It's quite interesting when you look at the connectors, and the thing that I've noticed is it's a lot easier to bring Yammer and SharePoint and other tools into Teams than it is to do it the other way around.
Yeah.
Bringing Teams into SharePoint, you sort of can do it, but it's obviously not where the main bulk of the effort's been put. So I think hanging on to Microsoft coattails and seeing the direction they're going in, they're wanting Teams to be used as your main interface, where you can get feeds from lots of different places and then jump out into those places if you want to have a slightly richer experience.
Again, it's that familiarity, isn't it? So you're already using Teams to do this. Now you can use it to do that, and it doesn't feel like things are changing so much. Whereas I think beforehand, when we were working with SharePoint and Yammer was its own tool that you suddenly had to train everyone on. Here's how you use Yammer. This is what it is. This is why you're using it. Yeah. Whereas now it's a connection into Teams, and people just go to the relevant channel, which is their community channel, that just happens to be linked with Yammer, but they're still using Teams.
So it's using those other 365 functions as engines rather than as kind of standalone things, isn't it?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
And,
okay,
it does feel like Microsoft are going to be pushing that more and more. If the direction carries on the way it is, that there's going to be more functionality coming into Teams rather than less, for sure.
Cool. Yeah. Okay, so just starting to wrap up. So any questions or anything else that any of our guests would like to see? No. Excellent. Yeah, so hopefully we've been covering some useful, interesting information. So just final questions. So if you had either of you guys had a client coming to you and saying, right, we want a company intranet and we've seen your webinar, we've been playing with Teams, we just want to build an intranet using Microsoft Teams. what would you be advising them? And say they were a 50-person company. You know, what would your initial thoughts and initial advice to them be?
So if they're coming in and they're asking specifically, we want to build this in teams, I would actually personally take that part away from the situation. What I want to know with my client is what it is they want, what are their success factors, what are their objectives and KPIs, what is this system going to be? You know, it's too soon, potentially, depending who the person is, but probably too soon for them to be selecting the technology until we define the design and the scope of the project.
Give us the requirements, let us suggest the solution that fits those requirements.
But if they're like really, you know, really keen on the team's roots and you know that's what they sort of got the heart set on.
Yep. And then I think that's where you fall into the risk reward area. So again, it's lining up those requirements with how far you can push teams and what the limitations are going to be in each item. So if they ask for news, here's all the features that you can use in news. Let's go through them and see which ones are fitting the business. If they ask about policies and procedures, have you thought about the fact that you might need to utilize a bit more of SharePoint because you don't want everyone in the business being able to modify the document. So you'd still take each individual stream of their intranet and their design and look at what teams can give them, and then see if that's actually going to meet those business requirements, because what you don't want to be doing is giving some elements that actually only get you 50% of the way there, and you need to start exploring the other items.
And you know, if someone was coming to me saying I want an intranet purely on Teams, I'd probably be saying, actually, there is no such thing as an intranet purely on Teams. You've got a scale of full-on SharePoint intranet at one end and mostly Teams at the other end, and they're going to sit somewhere along that scale. So there's conversations around whereabouts they are on that scale, and a big thing right at the beginning is just make governance one of the absolute priorities on here. You know, really think about how much control you want to give, how much control you want to keep. And those things are going to dictate to an extent where on that scale you are, as well as the functionality side of things.
The really interesting part of that question, though, is the fact that we're now in a current climate where that question can actually be asked. Because if that question was asked 2 years ago, my reply would be, you want to make an intranet on a video conferencing tool? What are you talking about? Actually now you've got the ability for people to ask that question, which gives us a great problem to have. What tool needs to be used? Because there's now so much ability and tools that are out there. It's good that people are asking those questions compared to 2 years back.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. I thought that was really interesting and useful. It's amazing when you actually put your mind to these things, even when you're dealing with them day in, day out, you start thinking about things from a different direction and sort of realize, wow, I think
just
partly realizing how things,
to clients,
how things have come on in the last couple of years and different ways of doing things. So thank you very much for that. Thank you to our guests for staying with us. Hope it was interesting. Nicole will send out a link. This webinar will go up onto our YouTube channel, so Nicole will send it out to you. So if you want to share it with friends and family, please do. And enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thanks, guys.
Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.